Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen wa sallallahu ala Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. In the name of Allah, the most beneficent, the most merciful. I testify that there is no true God worthy of worship except Allah, and that Muhammad is Allah's true slave and messenger. One of the fundamental foundations in Islam is the matter of ijma, consensus. The meaning of ijma, first, linguistically, it means al-azmu wal-ittifaq, determination and agreement. This is from the linguistic aspect. Like in the saying of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Yunus chapter 10 verse 71. Allah Azza wa Jal فَأَجْمِعُوا أَمْرَكُمْ وَشُرَكَاءَكُمْ. As in Surah Yunus chapter 10 verse 71. So make your plot, decide on it, you and your partners, gather upon it. This is from the linguistic aspect. From the technical Islamic aspect, it would mean اتفاق مجتهدي هذه الأمة بعد النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم على حكم شرعي. The agreement amongst the mujtahids, the highly reliable scholars of this ummah, after the Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam, upon a legal ruling. Upon a legal ruling. So, if there is a difference of opinion by one of them, then it is not considered ijma'. It is not considered consensus. Especially if this person who may have, or this scholar who may have this different opinion, is known in his sound knowledge and fiqh. Then in this case, his disagreement is considered and therefore reliable to take into account. And this is the correct opinion. Meaning, if one person, one scholar, differs on the matter, then there is no more consensus on it. And when the definition mentions the mujtahids, those highly reliable scholars, then there is exclusion for the common Muslim and exclusion of the muqallida, the blind followers, meaning their agreement nor their disagreement. Their agreement and also their disagreement is not considered, is not related to the matter of consensus. The blind follower, known in Arabic as al-muqallid, his agreement or disagreement is not considered, is not part of the question. Why? Because he is a copy of the one whom he follows. He has no opinion, he has no ijtihad, he has no capability of checking and pursuing the evidences, and therefore there is a consensus amongst the Muslims that the blind follower is not from the scholars. Having said this, one should remember that the blind follower is still better than the ignorant, because the blind follower follows a scholar from the scholars of Islam, while the ignorant follows nothing except his desires and does not know. And therefore one should not absolutely deny and denounce blind following from every angle, nor accept it from every angle. Rather, it is to be said that at-taqleed, blind following, is obligated with necessity, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ, in Surah Al-Anbiya chapter 21 verse 7. قال الله عز وجل فاسألوا أهل الذكر إن كنتم لا تعلمون. So ask the people of remembrance, of knowledge, if you know not. So this blind follower, who has no tool for ijtihad, for exerting the effort to reach the deduction of a ruling, on a ruling, what should he do? He should ask and follow. So this is therefore the ruling concerning the blind follower, and this is the preponderating opinion, that at-taqleedu jaiz, blind following is permissible under necessity, like eating the dead meat, like eating the dead animal, rather. So ask if you don't know. So if you know, then don't ask. In the definition, there came the agreement of the mujtahids of this ummah. So therefore, the consensus by other than this ummah is not considered, it's excluded. So if someone says that the Christians are in agreement that this is lawful and this is unlawful, could this then be considered? No. The answer, no. It cannot be considered to be taken as ijma, consensus. Then in the definition, agreement of the mujtahids of this ummah after the Prophet. So therefore, excluded is the agreement during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, because this cannot be considered as consensus for itself to be a dalil on its own and evidence, because the dalil, the evidence, occurred by the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, whether it is by way of action or saying or approval. So that's why if the companion, if the Sahabi says, we used to do this, or in the narration it comes like they used to do such and such during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, then legally this is raised to the Prophet ﷺ, and it is not relating consensus. So we don't say that the consensus during the time of the Prophet ﷺ is a dalil, is an evidence, because the dalil is established by the sunnah itself. So if the companions on the other hand agree on a certain ruling during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, and we don't say that this is consensus by way of being itself a dalil and evidence, however in reality من حيث الواقع, يعني in terms of practicality and reality, it is a consensus. From that angle only. Now if someone asks the question, why it is not considered to be a consensus, the answer is, the sunnah itself being a dalil and evidence is stronger than the ijma', than the consensus as a dalil, as a proof. And that's why therefore we know that none of the scholars, none of them disagree that the sunnah is dalil, is evidence, but they disagreed as to whether the ijma' is evidence or not. And therefore, since the sunnah is stronger, then it is not permitted for us to go to that which is lesser or weaker with the presence of the stronger. Back to the definition. The definition is the agreement of the mujtahids of this ummah after the Prophet ﷺ upon a legal ruling. So therefore excluded from this is their agreement on an intellectual ruling or a normal traditional matter. Now, if sound people agree, all of them, that every cause or each effect has its cause, this has nothing to do with Sharia. And if the whole of mankind agree that the whole is greater than the part, this is an intellectual consensus, but it is unrelated to the legal consensus as being itself a dalil for Sharia. The scholars, however, on the other hand, disagree. Whether consensus or ijma' is possible to occur or not. And if it occurs, would it be considered to be an evidence, hujjah, a proof, or not? Some of them are with the opinion that it is not possible for consensus to take place, and they took by the words of Imam Ahmad rahimahullah, who said, whoever claims consensus, then he lied. What makes him sure? Because it may be that they differed. And they also took as a proof that encompassing every saying of the learned scholars of ijtihad is not possible, especially after the ummah of Islam became greater and people spread in many of the lands, and then disagreements occurred, and so how could it be possible for a scholar in the way west to be aware of the saying of the scholars in the way east, especially when they didn't have fast ways of communications? So they went to the opinion that therefore the consensus is not possible. However, the correct opinion that is the opposite, that al-ijma'u laysa bimuta'addir, that ijma' consensus, it is not something that could not be possible. It is true that knowledge of consensus may be difficult because it requires vast encompassment and knowledge of disagreements. Not every person could come and say that the ulama are unanimously agreed on such and such, because this requires vast knowledge and pursuit of sayings. The second matter which the ulama disagreed about is whether the ijma' is a proof. Some of them said it is not a proof, because the proof is sufficient in the saying of Allah and His Messenger, not in what people may say, and therefore it cannot be taken as a dalil, proof or evidence, even if it occurs. However, the correct opinion is that the ijma' is mumkin wa annahu dalil, is that the ijma' is possible and it is a dalil, an evidence, and this is established by way of the Quran, the Sunnah, and the intellect. We take from the Quran the following evidences. The saying of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, وكذلك جعلناكم أمة وسطا لتكونوا شهداء على الناس. In Surah Al-Baqarah, chapter 2, verse 143. وكذلك جعلناكم أمة وسطا, and thus we have made you a wasat, a just and best nation, that you be witnesses over mankind. and the messenger be a witness over you. And this witnessing encompasses the witnessing over the deeds and the rulings concerning the deeds. And the saying of the witness is acceptable. So on the day of resurrection, this ummah will be taken as a witness. And therefore, this ummah will testify that the messengers proclaimed the message to their nations. And the ummah knows that from the book and the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. And if the saying of the ummah is acceptable regarding the deeds, then it is also acceptable regarding the rulings vis-a-vis these deeds. Are they obligatory? Are they permissible? Are they unlawful? Are they disliked? Are they recommendable? And therefore, if the Muslims, meaning the scholars, are in agreement that this is sunnah, then this becomes a proof that it is sunnah, because they are witnesses that this is from the sharia and that it is from the sunnah, or whether this is obligatory or unlawful and the same. The second evidence is in the saying of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah An-Nisa, chapter 4, verse 59. قال الله تعالى: فإن تنازعتم في شيء فردوه إلى الله والرسول. Oh, you believe, obey Allah and obey the Messenger and those you Muslims who are in authority. And if you differ in anything amongst yourselves, so this implies if you agree, then it is true. But in case if you differ in anything amongst yourself, refer it to Allah and His Messenger. If you believe in Allah and in the last day, this is better and more suitable for final determination. This implies if you agree, then it is true, and it doesn't need to be referred to the book and the sunnah because it's true. So therefore in this verse there is dalil, evidence that if they would agree, then their agreement is true, because being true, it does not oppose the Quran nor the sunnah. And it is impossible for the ummah, meaning the scholars of it, to be on agreement on something which is opposite to the truth, because the Prophet ﷺ said, and this is the third evidence, because the Prophet ﷺ said, and this is the third evidence, لا تجتمع أمتي على ضلالة. My ummah does not unite on misguidance, on error. And this hadith is reported by Ibn Majah from Anas, may Allah be pleased with him, and Shaykh al-Albani rahimahullah authenticated it. It is impossible that this ummah therefore unite on misguidance, and therefore if it is impossible as such, then whatever it agrees upon is true. Now, intellectually, also a proof from the intellect is to say that the consensus of the ummah upon something, either it is true or it is falsehood. And thus, if it is true, then it is an evidence. And if it is false, then how could it be permissible that this ummah unites, which is the best of and most honorable of nations, unite on something false not acceptable to Allah. This is from the greatest, or this constitutes the greatest impossibility. So this is by the way of intellect. Now, the kinds of ijma, or types of ijma, types of consensus. The types of consensus are two. Certain. First type is certain. The second type is speculative. As to the certain, this is necessitated to occur, like the consensus that the 5 prayers are obligatory. That zina, adultery, is forbidden. No one denies this, its establishment, or that it is a proof or evidence. So, whatever is known to occur by necessity by this ummah is a certain consensus. Meaning it doesn't require contemplation and thinking and so forth. Like the ijma on the obligation of the 5 prayers. Now if someone says, well, it may be possible that people differed, or some people differ regarding the obligation of the 5 prayers. The answer, it is impossible for anyone to disagree regarding this matter except someone who is new to Islam, doesn't know anything about Islam. But as a person who lives amongst the Muslims, we know that he believes the obligation of the 5 prayers, and similarly the forbiddance of zina, of adultery. This is a matter of consensus, decisive and certain. So no one can say that this is not established, and no one says that it is not a hujjah, a proof, this type of ijma, of consensus. So if someone now says, what is your proof that the 5 prayers are obligatory? The answer will be the consensus of the Muslims. No one denies this. It does not mean that there is no evidence from the book or the sunnah, but it is permissible that the evidences are multiple for the same matter. And no one denies that it is a hujjah, a proof, that this type of certain consensus. And anyone who denies this while knowing, meaning is not ignorant regarding it, then he commits kufr. But if he is of those who may be ignorant, like someone new to Islam, or someone living in a remote area away from the people of knowledge, and he prays but doesn't know that these are obligations or not, then he is excused. He cannot be declared as kafir. The second type is the speculative, al-dhanni, and this cannot be known, the speculative type cannot be known except through pursue and deductions. Mean it is not known by necessity, rather it is searched and pursued. Books are searched which tells narrations from those who preceded us, and the search follows to the books of those written by the latter ones, and therefore they examine. If the books and the narrations agree on a certain ruling, we say this is consensus, but it is not certain. It is not of the certain type, because it is possible that there may be a disagreement but not known to those who examine and pursue from the ulama. The scholars differed on the possibility of its establishment. The scholars differed concerning the possibility of establishment of this type of speculative consensus. Some of them are with the opinion that it is not possible to establish, and thus they said إنه لا يوجد إجماع, there is no ijma, therefore, not to mention to be a proof on its own. As to the certain consensus, they said, well, this has been established by texts, and therefore we don't need consensus. And therefore that's why some of the scholars went to the opinion that al-ijma'u laysa hujja, that the consensus is not a hujja, a proof. They said that it's not possible to exist, and so forth. And from those who said this was Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal in one of the narrations attributed to him, when he said anyone who claims the ijma', then he is lying. What makes him sure? They may have differed, but the correct opinion, you had heard it, that it is possible. And the most preponderating opinions regarding this type of ijma' is the opinion of Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, who said in his book Al-Aqidah Al-Wasitiyah, he said, وَالْإِجْمَاعُ الذي ينضبط ما كان عليه السلف الصالح إذ بعدهم كثر الاختلاف وانتشرت الأمة. The most preponderating opinion regarding this type of ijma is the opinion of Shaykh al-Islam, who said وَالْإِجْمَاعُ الَّذِي يَنْضَبِطُ, and the established ijma which can be defined is that upon which the Salaf as-Salih were upon, because after them the ikhtilaf increased, the difference increased, and the ummah dissipated, spread out in the land. This constitutes part 1 of this matter, and inshallah ta'ala we will discuss in the next time the conditions of